The mountain had a way of swallowing years whole, chewing them into silence, and spitting them back as wrinkles on a man's face. And Elias Crow knew this better than anyone because he had given the mountain the best parts of his life without asking for anything in return, waking every morning before the sun split the ridge, breathing in pine and frost, listening to the slow, ancient heartbeat of the earth beneath his cabin, telling himself for the 1,000th time that solitude was a choice and not a wound, that the quiet did not ache when the wind moaned through the trees like a memory that refused to die, because Elias was 63 and the world below the mountain had already decided what men like him were. Supposed to be finished, hardened, alone, and he had nodded along to that verdict years ago, telling the rare travelers who passed through that he was too old for marriage, saying it with a crooked smile and a shrug as if it were wisdom earned rather than fear practiced, as if love were a young man's game and not something that could still burn in the chest of someone who had buried more hopes than he could count. And the truth was that Elias had loved once, deeply, recklessly, the kind of love that rewires the bones. But that was decades ago, before the mind collapse, before the letter that never arrived, before the silence that stretched so long it became his normal. And now his days were simple: chopping wood, fixing traps, brewing bitter coffee, watching storms roll in like armies and pass without noticing. Him and his nights were quieter still, filled with the creak of old timber and the whisper of thoughts he pretended not to hear, until the morning the stranger climbed the trail in boots that were too clean for the mountain and eyes that were far too familiar, and Elias nearly dropped his axe when he saw her standing at the edge of his clearing. Wind-tangling dark hair shot through with silver, her coat dusted with snow, her gaze steady and unafraid, like someone who had rehearsed this moment in her heart 1,000 times and finally decided fear wasn't worth listening to anymore. And when she said his name, Elias, it wasn't a question. It was a memory spoken out loud, and the mountain seemed to hold its breath as he stared at her, chest tightening, mind scrambling backward through time, because no one said his name like that anymore. Not with warmth, not with history. And when he finally found his voice, it came out rough, unused, asking, "You're lost," even though he knew she wasn't, even though every instinct in him screamed that fate had finally found his cabin. And she smiled then, a small, tired smile that carried 30 years in its corners, and said, "No, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." And Elias felt something crack open inside him that he had sealed shut with stubborn pride and loneliness, inviting her inside because manners were easier than questions, because the mountain taught you to offer shelter before judgment. And as she warmed her hands by the fire and wrapped herself in silence, he studied her when she wasn't looking, the faint lines around her eyes, the strength in the way she held herself, realizing with a shock that time had shaped her, not erased her. And when she finally spoke again, voice soft but unwavering, she said, "I looked for you." And those 3 words hit him harder than any storm, because he had spent decades believing he was the one left behind, the one forgotten. And he laughed bitterly, shaking his head, saying, "You shouldn't have. I'm too old for the things you think you're here for." And she met his gaze, really met it, the way people do when they're done running, and replied, "I didn't climb this mountain for a boy, Elias. I came for the man who stayed." And the fire popped loudly as if in agreement, and memories flooded him, her younger face at the edge of town, the promise they made by the river, the night the mind collapsed and everything changed, the letter he wrote but never knew if she read, the years he spent telling himself that waiting was foolish and hope was dangerous. And she listened as he spoke then, really listened, as he poured out his practiced excuses about age and regret and how the mountain had made him unfit for love. And she let him finish, letting silence do its work, before quietly saying the words that would follow him for the rest of his life. "I've waited for you." And suddenly the years he thought he had lost rearranged themselves into Something else entirely. Not wasted time, but devotion, stretched thin across distance. And Elias felt the terrifying realization that the mountain had not protected him from heartbreak at all. It had only preserved it, kept it raw and waiting. And as snow began to fall outside, soft and relentless, he understood that some stories do not end when we think they do. They simply pause until both hearts are brave enough to continue. And if this moment moved something inside you, if you believe love doesn't have an expiration date, and that the stories worth telling are the ones that wait, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because this is only the beginning of Elias and her journey, and the mountain still has much to reveal.